Operational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. Today is the 23rd of August, Tuesday, and thank you for all being here. We have some reports and some other things that will be on the agenda, and we look forward for you to learn something and for us to hear from you if that is your wish. We'll start out with Organized Development Commission, UDC, which I will report on. We met August 11th at 4 p.m. at the Seacog Center. We had a final draft of the Transportation Improvement Program, TIP as it's called. Discussed a lot of projects during this time. Veterans Parkway, 26th Street Exchange, etc. These are all some of the projects that are going to be on the TIP and looking to be part of the building of Sioux Falls infrastructure in the next 3 to 5 years. Highway 42 from at western Minnesota County Corridor study was also done all the way out past the Wall Lake Road, and there's going to be some interesting things happening there. They made the city or the state made some proposals to put in some roundabouts out there instead of stoplights. Some of the people wanted more stoplights and less roundabouts, and we'll see what the compromise ends up. And we'll see how that comes about. I apologize for not having the mic on. I hope everybody could hear me. And then exit 406, the Brandon exit on Interstate 90 was also looked at. They're going to have they had a public meeting with 90 people there. A lot of discussion with Marmon Industry right there, how they make left and right hand turns with those 300-foot towers or 250-foot towers. I don't think I'd like driving one of those and seeing somebody crowding me at all. It would be a little bit disconcerting. But they did have a good public meeting, and they're working on ways to work around that, because that will be redone here very shortly. So no other business, and so that was it. Any questions of me on the UDC? Okay, moving forward then, we will go to, I want to make one other announcement, and that is that there was a glitch with Minnehaha County, and we are unable to hold our joint council's Minnehaha County Commission meeting at 5 o'clock. So there will be no joint meeting at 5 o'clock. Thank you for that. Okay, that's done. We're in open discussion. Any open discussion? Councilor Staley.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I have 2 items for open discussion tonight. The first is that I just wanted to invite the council to an event that I'm going to be scheduling in October, the first weekend of October 1st and 2nd. I'm going to be buying a booth at the Benson Flea Market. And past 10 years, I've been out there many times, sometimes campaigning, sometimes with petition drives. And I have found that to be a really fabulous place to meet with the citizens and talk with them about issues. So I will pay for the booth. And I know there's some other people running for office that might be out there as well. And so I'm going to notice that as a public meeting, and that way if any other council members wanted to stop out and visit with the citizens, they would be invited to do so. So that first weekend in October. And the second thing I wanted to bring up is that I had a discussion today with our wonderful caring code enforcement officer, Matt Tobias. And I was just wondering, I wanted to touch base with him about this new boulevard ordinance that we have, because I thought we were going to be sending out a notice to our citizens this summer to let them know, what's coming. And he reaffirmed that this first year is educational, no fines being given to people, and second year, again, educational, sending out letters, no fines, and then the third year in 2018 will be, people will start being fined if they are in violation. So he was thinking that they were going to be sending out the water bill information in the spring. And so I suggested to him, as I've said this in the past, that it might be more beneficial to send that out now, because there are things that will be in violation, like taller perennials, rose bushes, more than 25% rocks, some people have little retaining walls around flower beds and trees. Those will be outlawed as well. So I think it would be better to get that information out to people now before they start adding more of those things to their boulevard versus waiting until the spring when it might be harder to take those out. So just wanted to put that in there, that would be something that hopefully we can kind of get some energy behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none?
Sorry.
Oh,
Just
Councilor
getting
Starr.
the microphone on. Thank you. Couple of things that I wanted to report on quickly. This has been our first chance for council discussion for a while. So back in the end of July, I wanted to thank the folks with the Living Library or Compassionate Sioux Falls. Had the chance to be part of a really interesting program where the Living Library, where the library part or the books were actually people. And they're able to share their story of their background. There were first-generation Americans. There were a gentleman who is a Native American counselor, different groups. There was probably about 10 people that had a chance to interact with, and the compassionate side of meeting the people in our community. Colleen Moran was a big part of organizing it. Our deputy clerk, Denise Tucker, was part of that group as Compassionate Sioux Falls, and I was just really excited to see. We need to talk more to our neighbors and understand where they come from, and on so many different levels. So the second thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was on Saturday, with the assistance of Chief Burns and Chief Sedaris, had a chance to meet with the neighbors at Firehouse 7, so up along Benson Road and Hermosa and Cliff, and in that area. There were over 40 residents who showed up, and we spent 3 hours talking about public safety, things that they could do in their neighborhood. Again, following that same theme of talking to your neighbors and getting to know what's going on in your block. Kids being able to play in the park. We had 2 officers from the Sioux Falls Police Department who were there. We had a sergeant and an officer who were able to explain how they respond to calls, how calls get prioritized, why sometimes it takes a little longer to get a response to a barking dog complaint versus a robbery that's in process. So it was a great discussion where the residents were able to visit with the officers. The fire department again was there as well, so they had a chance to understand a little bit more about public safety and things. So want to publicly thank both chiefs, the officers who were able to be part of that, and most importantly the 40-some members of the community were wanting to know how they could make their neighborhood a safer place. And so again, we talked about Neighborhood Watch, as well as starting a neighborhood community association type of project. So both of those went really well. So
thank you very much. Sounds like a great turnout and a lot of fun. Yeah, I bet you ate during that time too, didn't you?
I learned a lot, and the thing I learned, I didn't provide refreshments, and so that was a disappointment to some of those in attendance. So we'll make sure there's refreshments next.
Got to have food in this part of the
It's
country.
always about food and
Got to have
beverages.
food. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I know we all just received an email. I don't know if you've had a chance as a council to review it. Dave Fifley, our city attorney, did send out information, so thank you for doing that, outlining the process for the signatures that have been turned in and what's to be expected. So I just want to draw attention to that email that was sent out to give us kind of a guideline of what to expect from the city clerk's office, as well as our attorney's office. One thing I just wanted to add to that news release, the email that was sent out is, it says that the city is authorized to sell bonds for the proposed city administration building effective October 1st. Obviously, we all know that to be true, but what I want to remind everybody is that we do not have to sell them by October 1st. Nothing is requiring us to sell those bonds by October 1st, and so if I say we, the council doesn't have any further vote in this, but if the administration chooses to pause and uphold the voice of the people and allow the process to work through those signatures to see if they are in fact validated, if there are enough to even go forward. These are all big ifs right now. And so I just remind everybody that we do not have a shall sell the bonds on October 1st. This is simply a can sell, and we can also wait. So just want to remind everybody that, and make sure you check out the email because it is giving a full description of the process and how it will go down. Continue to work through that through the city clerk's office as well in conjunction with our city attorney. So that's all I wanted to bring up. Thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Well, and let me also say that having been involved in 2 successful petition drives in the past, I've worked with 2 separate city clerks, Deborah Owen and Lori Hogstead, and they had our signatures verified within a week. And getting to know Tom Greco, he is a fine man, very competent, and I have every confidence that he is going to do this in a very expedient manner for our citizens. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom, and please, as I know you will, you'll do a good job on it. I know you will. So thank you. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, can I toss one more item in if I could?
Sure.
Yesterday, the mayor and administration had a news conference talking about the railroad redevelopment project. And I wanted to reiterate to the citizens of Sioux Falls that your chance to be part of that process is coming up next week. The people from RDG, the architectural firm, will be in town to meet with staff on Tuesday. They'll draft the plan on Wednesday, have public input on Wednesday night, add some final touches on Thursday during the day, and then have another open house informational meeting on Thursday night. So there are those 2 opportunities that you'll have to be part of that process and offer your input, as well as there'll be a plan that'll be finalized then by a date in October that I believe is on the schedule already for us as a council to take a look at that. But those are the 2 times that you're going to have a chance as a citizen to offer input in those 2 evening events. So,
thank you for the reminder. Very good. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Was there any, I wasn't there and I haven't watched it, just full disclosure, was there any conversation of why 2 back-to-back and why not spreading it out a little bit? I'm just curious, hate to put you on the spot, I wasn't there. Just curious if there's maybe the chair or vice chair knows more information than we do in regards to just kind of the expedited manner of that. Just curious.
I can say from the chair's standpoint that no, I had no input into the dates. When we're bringing people in from out of town like that, obviously it costs less money to have it back-to-back rather than spread out over a week and having to fly them in once or twice instead of once. I'm sure that was part of the reasoning for having them back-to-back. And I think one is in the afternoon and one is in the evening, if I'm not sure. No, they're at 5 o'clock down at the library. Okay. And one is from 5 to 7, the other one's from 5 to 6. And so I'm sure that that gives ample opportunity right. To take that in for anyone who would have interest in it. Okay? Yes. Councilor?
Well, the latest stop in the newbies tour last week was we got a tour of the water division, and it was fascinating and informative, and I thought we'd throw out a little shout out to Superintendent Anderson and his crew. I mean, the more I learn about the city through all these various tours and how they work and the people involved in our city and how they keep it functioning, the more impressed I am. So I thought I'd throw that out.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's quite an operation out there, isn't it? Okay, seeing no one else, let's get into our regular agenda. Presentations for Community Health Needs Assessment by Alicia and Mary. And ladies, we're looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. My name is Alicia Clora. I'm the Assistant Director for the Health Department, and we are here to share with you the results of the 2016 Community Health Needs Assessment for the City of Sioux Falls. One of the roles of a local health department is really to have an understanding through data, the health of our residents, and to also work with other local partners to create initiatives that will improve the health of our residents. So we really started taking this work on in 2011 and 2012, and we do this work through our initiative called Live Well Sioux Falls. And at that time, there were other agencies and partners in the community that were kicking off community health needs assessments as well, specifically Sanford and Avera. And we worked very closely with them at that time and shared our data and worked very openly between all of the organizations. But ultimately, 3 reports were produced for Sioux Falls. 3 years later, when we wanted to take on these activities again, we sat down and realized that by working together, we would create not only efficiencies, but have greater community impact by focusing all of our finite resources on a few strategic priorities. So we're excited about this work, and we're excited to present it to you today. And I'd like you to know that this project team, as well as Live Well, is beginning to be recognized nationally. The project team of the Community Health Needs Assessment, including the Health Department, Sanford, and Avera, have been invited to speak at a national conference to talk about this innovative approach to the work. And that conference is specifically about quality improvement in public health. I'd also like to share that the CDC recently lifted up Live Well as an example of cross-sector collaboration to improve public health. And lastly, we recently received a recognition from the South Dakota Department of Health as their 2016 Chronic Disease Partner of the Year. So we're excited. Good things are happening in Sioux Falls because of the work of Live Well and our partners. Today, the Health Department would specifically like to thank the project team. We have Julie Ward, Caitlin Hurley, and Teresa Miller from Avera, Carrie McLeod from Sanford, and then our own Mary Michaels and Stan Cogan from the Health Department. These folks came together over a period of about 18 months to collect data, analyze data, and ultimately make recommendations to our agencies to improve the health of our residents. So I'd like to introduce Mary to present the findings, and then we'll be happy to take questions at the end.
Good afternoon, counselors. Mary Michaels. I'm the Public Health Prevention Coordinator for the Sioux Falls Health Department. And what we're talking about today is really making an impact in public health and changing health behaviors. But to do that, we really need a systematic approach. We need to understand the environment in which people live and work and learn and play. And so when we set out to do a health assessment, we wanted to take a multi-pronged approach to do that, to get as much data and information that we could about our community. And doing this in a collaborative way allowed each one of our primary partner organizations to really lead a different component of the work. Sanford Health, for example, took the lead on the resident survey and worked with a researcher to do a randomized resident survey in Sioux Falls, asking questions about not only the individuals' lifestyles, but their perceptions of health in our community. Avera then took the lead on a series of focus groups with organizations in our community, as well as individuals served by many of those organizations. And then within the health department, we led a series of discussions with all sectors of the community, inviting in representatives from work sites, healthcare, education, nonprofits, and other departments of government to talk about various health and quality of life issues. Graduate students from the South Dakota State University, as well as staff from the Department of Health, helped us with some secondary data review as we looked at other health indicators from the local, state, and national level. And then this provided us a format that we can use going forward. And this is really our new baseline for the community because we've never collected data in this way before in this integrated collaborative approach. It's worked so well, and we look forward to continuing to work in a collaborative way like this in the future. So our zip codes are an indicator of where we live. However, more and more research is showing that the zip code can also be an indicator of how long we will live, because there are so many different factors that impact our health. And in the public health world, we refer to those as social determinants of health. You see a sampling of those on the screen, but those aren't all. It can be literacy, language, security, and economic stability. And in fact, when we talk about economic stability, that's tied to almost every other aspect of social determinants of health, from having a job and adequate housing to having transportation that allows you to access services or having access to healthy foods. And so when we consider facts like 40% of our students in the school district qualify for free or reduced meals, or the Bishop Dudley House provided, just that one entity alone provided 34,000 nights of lodging last year, we need to look at that complete picture of economic stability and all of these different areas that affect our health and our quality of life. So the World Health Organization actually defines health as complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not just the absence of disease. And so all of these different areas, when we are talking about individual health choices, they are individual choices, but they are impacted by policy, and they are impacted by the environment around us. And there's a relationship between the individual, their schools, their community, their workplaces, and decisions that are made in the area of public policy. Because poor health decisions do have an impact not only to that individual, but also to the community. So change can and should happen at different levels. And we refer to that as a health in all policies approach, where we are ensuring that everyone has the ability to make healthy choices and that that healthy choice is an easy choice to make. So there are a number of issues that we looked at as we were collecting data, any number of things that we could focus on when we're talking about health. But as we went through the data, we as community partners tried to identify some priority areas that we felt were worthy of community attention. And so those three areas are obesity, behavioral health, and access to care. And each of those have many components to them, and I'm going to share some details about each of those areas. So we hear a lot of talk about the obesity epidemic, but the real epidemic is actually poor nutrition and lack of physical activity. So here in our community, we still have over 2/3 of our adults who are overweight and obese. When residents were asked in the survey if they had any physical activity in the past 30 days, only 20% responded that yes, they had. Our kids do a little bit better, but not much. We still have about 1/3 of our young people who are overweight and obese. And when we look at the nutrition component of that specifically, it really points to fruit and vegetable consumption as one of the main issues. When we look at not only our local data and statewide data, but even from national sources like the Center for Disease Control that has a tool they call the Behavior Risk Factor Surveillance System, or BRFIS as it's typically called, Sioux Falls MSA ranks among the lowest in the nation for our fruit and vegetable consumption. We're slightly better in some areas and slightly worse in some areas than the state average, but when you look at the number on the screen where 6% are consuming enough fruit and 8% are consuming enough vegetables, we have a lot of work to do. And again, in different sectors of our community, almost every sector with the exception of schools showed nutrition as a need. But young people are still have some work to do themselves because only about 40% are consuming one or more fruits and vegetables. So lots of work to do there. Our second area, behavioral health, mental health, is really connected to our physical health. When we are well in our mental health, we are better able to care for ourselves. And through our resident survey, the respondents indicated that the top issues they were most concerned about were depression, anxiety, stress, and the use of alcohol and drugs in the community. The Helmsley Charitable Trust had also done a statewide survey of residents, and they had some specific data to Sioux Falls. And so that's the orange chart that you see, where it shows 17% indicating having experienced adverse childhood experiences. And that refers to things like child abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction. And more research shows that those things that happen at in our childhood impact our physical and our behavioral health as we age. They also looked at what they called unmet needs. So the chart shows 29% with unmet mental health needs and 65% with unmet alcohol or drug abuse needs. And the way they classified with that was they asked individuals if they needed any type of care, physical health care, mental health care, care for drug or alcohol abuse within the past 12 months. And if residents answered that they received some but not all care, or that they had received no care at all, that's when they went into the classification of unmet needs. So the alcohol use. Binge drinking is one of the indicators that we look at, and unfortunately this is an area where we are not doing any better than we first looked at this 3 years ago. And it indicates having 4 or 5 alcoholic drinks on the same occasion in the past 30 days. It's 5 drinks for men and 4 for women. And we are still higher than the state average, and actually our rate of binge drinking went up slightly since the last time we did an assessment. And that heavy drinking and that binge drinking not only have health effects on that individual, but also risks for injury to themselves and to others. And so when we're talking about either alcohol or substance abuse, there's an impact to that individual, but certainly also to the families, to their employers, and to the communities. And while we don't have specific data at the local level regarding particular types of drug use, we do see reports like increased drug arrests. And we see other rates, young people using, people who are in counseling talking about when they first started, even as early as the age of 12. Face It Together, Sioux Falls did a survey of their clients, and 65% of their clients who were receiving addiction support indicated they were employed, and nationally that number is about 70%. So there is an impact to that employer if that individual is not receiving help. And often they're not seeking help because of that stigma, that fear, that shame. But they're increased risk for their own health and and other relationships. Employers are facing those costs with healthcare costs, lost productivity when we are not getting these people the help that they might need. So even though we do have many healthcare assets in our community, our residents, our focus groups also cited access to care as one of the needs that we need to look at. And access can mean different things to different people. It can be affordability of care. It can be transportation to get to a medical appointment. It can even be whether or not they're aware of what resources are even available in the community. The most often cited gap that our focus groups talked about was something they called the handoff, that coordination of care that might need to happen if somebody is receiving a wide variety of services, from healthcare to other types of social services. In the area of cost of care, there are many factors that we know that are out of our control. However, there are things that we can do. Avera and Sanford both offer charitable care, and at Falls Community Health, we have the sliding fee scale to help people pay for that care, but also we try to connect them to resources to get the support that they need. So here's where the health and the economics intersect. So when we look at the overall health of a community, it's actually a core element to our economic vitality, because there are financial costs related to disease, but there are also financial benefits when we invest in prevention. So your work makes a difference, and your work can impact the health of our residents. For example, when in our work we talk a lot about the built environment, which is everything around us, even our network of streets and our sidewalks. So when you accelerate the work of the Main Avenue Road Diet that we just celebrated, when you pass the Complete Streets policy that looks at all modes of transportation, including walking and biking, and making sure that our streets are safe for everyone, and even approving reverse angle parking that makes it safer for people exiting their cars or leaving so they can see other cars, pedestrians, and bicyclists, you are impacting the health of our residents, and I thank you for that. So as we move forward, there will be many issues that we as individual partner organizations will work on, Avera, Sanford, the health department, other community partners. But we also did, in addition to identifying these priority health issues, we looked for some common strategies that we thought would be beneficial to look at from a collaborative angle. So we talked about behavioral health earlier. A behavioral health stakeholders group has already been brought together to look at projects that could address issues like access to care, referral to services, coordination of care, and even more public education about mental health. When we're looking at access to care and that coordination of care, there's a group called the Sioux Empire Network of Care, and all of our partner organizations are a part of that group. And we will continue to support their work as we look at how do we help those individuals access services and coordinate those services that they may need. And then we have many neighborhoods in Sioux Falls, very diverse neighborhoods in Sioux Falls. And what makes that neighborhood healthy can be very different depending on where they are in our community. So we have kicked off a project that we call Hayward Thrive, and it is in the Hayward Elementary neighborhood. And we want to engage those residents to identify what makes a healthy neighborhood for them. It could be advocating for built environment changes in their area to help walking and biking be safer. It could be looking at their access to healthy foods. But more than anything else, it's just engaging those residents to share their thoughts and ideas so that they are their best advocates for a healthy neighborhood. Perhaps forming that neighborhood association that can continue to work far beyond the scope of this project to look at things that help all residents be healthy and things that might even work for other neighborhoods. So again, this does not represent the full breadth of work of either Avera or Sanford or the Sioux Falls Health Department. In our own work, for example, we have a 5-year strategic plan for Live Well Sioux Falls, and that includes projects in nutrition, physical activity, tobacco prevention, and chronic disease risk management. So we do this not alone as a health department. We do this with community partners, and we have a wide variety of community partners from all sectors that we are so pleased and proud to be associated with, because we could not do this work without them or without you. So I appreciate your time and your attention. The full report is available on our website at livewellsiouxfalls.org, as well as the full survey report and the focus group. We do have hard copies available upon request, but all the information is available for download on our website. And we do have representatives from our Avera partners here, Alicia, Jill, and I. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer those.
First of all, thank you for a very complete report and all the good things that are happening around Sioux Falls and all the things that are still challenges. And we know we're headed in the right direction with you ladies leading us. Questions? Councilor Erickson.
If I can get my microphone on. Thank you. Thank you for the report. I appreciate it. I always think it's interesting. My question is in regards, maybe not specifically about this report, but recently I was up here for some meetings, and we were talking about different summer studies that the state is doing. And one of those summer studies they are doing is focusing on substance abuse, especially with the youth. And they're doing summer studies and meetings around. I'm curious what role Sioux Falls, your department, is playing in any of those meetings, or is it just kind of something watching from afar?
The Department of Health has many different work groups, and more often than not, we are included, whether they're looking at workforce health, model health policies, chronic disease policies. At one way or the other, they always reach out to us and to other community partners to be part of the discussion. So whether it's sitting formally on a committee or at least providing input, we work very closely with the Department of Health and other organizations even in our community that are looking at youth health.
Okay, let me ask maybe a different way then. Are you guys involved in the summer study with the state at all?
Want to pass that off to Jill?
Jill Franken, Public Health Director. And to answer your question, Counselor, we have not been directly involved with that, but we are working with stakeholders in our community specifically around some of the needs related to substance use through the collaborative work in the stakeholder group that Mary was talking about. But we are familiar with that being, that's happening, and we're familiar with some of the work that's being done. And we trust that they'll have some positive impact on our community as well.
Because oftentimes, you know, when they do those summer studies, they come up with a package of bills, and some are really bad, and some are okay, and some are good. And so it's just interesting kind of what comes out of some of these summer studies and stuff. And so keeping an eye on it as far as how it, if there's any specific mandates that come through or things of that would definitely have a huge impact on your budget as well as maybe the way that you conduct business within the community. And so I just was curious of the relationship and keeping an eye on that.
You bet. It'll dovetail well with a combination of the behavioral health needs that we've identified as well as the access to care, because I can tell you that those where this is their specialty, they would tell you that that's, you know, an issue for them as well, as being able to provide enough access to resources. So,
okay, thank you. I have other questions, but I'll wait for now.
Okay, Councilor Neisert.
Thank you, Mary, for coming. This was an interesting report, and I actually look forward to reading the entire thing, so hopefully I can get a hold of it. I guess first I would say it sounds like what you're saying is $1 of prevention can save a heck of a lot more later, 5 or 10 or more.
Yeah, and that's true not only in community prevention, so whether it's investing in efforts that look at nutrition, how do we help people access those healthy foods, if we're investing in physical activity and making sure that our community is walkable and bikeable, getting that daily physical activity, tobacco prevention programs. And, you know, each year we do a project called the Big Squeeze that encourages people to go get a blood pressure check. And it's just those early things that we can do to help save healthcare costs or more serious health effects down the road.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the other observation I do have, and I do have a few questions, is as I've done a police and an EMS ride along, not just the human cost, obviously, but the enormous cost and time that our police and our fire and our EMS deal with when it just comes to the drug and alcohol abuse. I mean, if you didn't have that, I can only imagine how many fewer calls we would have. I mean, on these ride-alongs,
so much of it was somehow tied into some sort of substance abuse. It was very amazing and sad. So the alcohol binge drinking that we have, that's troubling. Do you know how that compares to nationally, if ours is higher?
I don't have, I can get you a national statistic. I know that compared to the state, we're at about 20%, and the state is about 18%. I don't have the national number handy, but I can certainly follow up.
Okay, and how often do you do these surveys?
We are on about a 3-year cycle. The hospitals are actually required to do this every 3 years, and it was made even more of a priority with the Affordable Care Act. But then the great thing is that they were encouraged to work with public health. And so to be able to come together with them and share our resources gives us a better picture. So we would be looking at doing this again in 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Staley.
And once I would echo what's been said, this is fabulous to be using our resources to help people become healthy. And I wanted to ask you about, you talked about access to healthy foods, and I would think one of the ways we are doing that is by the community garden program, where we're located in different parts of Sioux Falls. But what else would you be able to do? I mean, would you ever be putting like a farmer's market in different places? And I don't know if the city, I know we've done the one at the Falls, but is that, or what other ideas do you have?
Well, we have formed a group that we call the Sioux Falls Food Council, and it includes retailers, farmers, gardeners, healthcare, education, some other nonprofits, health organizations, to look at some of those very issues. And when we have both retailers and farmers, I mean, it's a very diverse group of people with different approaches to handling access to food. We also have the banquet in Feeding South Dakota, because we know there are people with those acute needs for food as well. But and as actually Matt Gasson from Feeding South Dakota, who very aptly said, we have a challenge because we need to feed the line, but we also want to shorten that line. And so that's when we start looking at how can things like gardens, the school gardens programs that Groundworks is working on, we are working in cooperation with Parks and the Master Gardeners to look at the community garden program. How do we make that application process easier for the Master Gardeners so they can spend more hands-on time with individuals looking at developing those gardens, working in projects like our Hayward Thrive to really get a neighborhood feel for what are food access issues in that neighborhood. For example, there is not really a grocery store that is close by. So how do we help them navigate the transportation system if they need to use a bus, or identify where are those sources of healthy foods for them? And part of it too is education, because you hear a lot of talk about, well, it's too expensive to eat healthy. But if we can use resources from SDSU Extension and people that are working with low-income families on how do you maximize that food dollar, how do you shop that grocery store. And actually we just, there's a USDA program and other grant programs, and we were the recipient of a grant recently where we're going to be able to work with our local grocery stores and do some tours for low-income families and provide that education hands-on to them with recipes and tips for how they can maximize that food dollar. And just for awareness, when we look at that fruit and vegetable consumption, that's not just low-income families, that's all of us. And so how do we do more education and awareness? So a fun project we have happening right now is with SDSU Extension, we identify a fruit or a vegetable every month, and they have information about that fruit or vegetable, how to pick it at a market, how to find it at the store, how to know when it's ripe, what do you do with an eggplant. But then we're partnering with local chefs who are creating a basic recipe, not fancy ingredients, minimal steps, even with canned or frozen options, and putting that recipe together, and that's going out through all the grocery stores or the restaurants or wherever that chef happens to be. But it's now also going out into every packet of every SNAP recipient. There's one farmer's market in town that does accept SNAP benefits, and that's something that even at the state level, our State Department of Health is looking at. How do we look at farmers markets and encouraging them to use that so that we can get more individuals getting their fruits and vegetables?
Could I just add something?
Yes.
And along with that marketing thing, I have to say that the campaign that the South Dakota is doing on the Quit Line, I think is so well done to help people quit smoking. And I don't know how effective it's been, but that kind of a snappy thing that can get the message out is great. You brought up Matt Gasson. I had a conversation with him yesterday, and it kind of ricocheted off of something Councilwoman Erpenbach said last week, which I had kind of been thinking about myself, about the food pantry moving to a place where we can't get to it. And he and I talked about, he's saying that, well, I mean, I'm just really concerned that we lost that presence in an accessible area. Someone compared that to moving the banquet south to 85th Street. You know, people having to walk to that if there wasn't bus service. So he was talking about possibly putting these pantries with school districts, but that would only be servicing people who have children would be able to use those. So moving forward, I would challenge the hospitals, Avera, and all your partners in this to be looking at bringing that presence back into the areas of our city where people are really going to be needing those, and having the fruits and vegetables as well. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Erickson.
Since I waited, I just wanted to make sure if somebody else was going to ask any questions, and I don't know if it's more of a statement than a question, but what I take from all this information is how much we're talking about prevention and preventative services, and it's so important. But then just recently we heard that we're going to cut a big preventative service for substance abuse within our schools. And so it's very interesting as we hear about this awesome thing that we're doing in the community about being healthy and substance abuse and tobacco use and exercising, but then we're cutting a huge program. So, or that's the proposal, is to cut that. So I find it very interesting as we go through some of this. I'm not sure what the answer is right now, and I know that there's a lot of discussions going on, but it's certainly, I mean, just light bulb went on, not that it wasn't already on, but it just was interesting, the tie with this presentation and with hearing recently of getting rid of a program that does really address the needs within our schools and giving them access. Instead of saying, you know, student Joey, you got to go over here and we're going to send you over here and out of school. We're there in the schools and they're providing those services, and it's prevention. And we've seen, based on this report, how great and how our bang for our buck is really great with the prevention. So I just bring that to everybody's attention. Not that you didn't already see it, but I just thought it was really fascinating to see that relationship with there. And I really appreciate everything that you're doing in our community. This report is fantastic, and I look forward to kind of digging into it and seeing all the great work. So thank you.
Councilor Starr.
Great. Thank you, Mary. That was a great report. And what I wanted to do, and I'm pretty consistent about it, is thank you to our partners of Avera and Sanford in putting this report together, as well as the health department from the city. But I want to also say thank you for advocating for Medicaid expansion. That's going to be a huge emphasis for me as well as our city. I think that making that push forward to get preventative care for our residents, as well as getting the health care that they need, it'll be something that will help budgets both at the county and the city, and it's something that I think we need to continue to push forward to. And I know that Director Franken has done a good job of advocating for that as well as our partners. So thank you on all those levels.
Thank you.
Okay, one last question. You indicated that eating healthy fruits and vegetables and that kind of thing. Is carrot cake still considered a vegetable?
In moderation, Counselor, absolutely.
Good. We're ready then. We're ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Turbach, our July financials.
Good afternoon, Councilors. Tracy Turbach with the Finance Office. I'm here today with the July 31st monthly financial update. So I'll just jump right into it. As we always do, we look at the unemployment rate. This is has not changed since the last time I showed you this slide as we kicked off our budget presentations. Sioux Falls locally, our unemployment rate is at 2.3%. You can see the kind of the historical trend over the last several years has us at a lower rate today than we have in either of the past 2 years. Looking at building permit values, through the month of July, the city has issued permits valued at almost $449 million. That compares to about $460 million a year ago, so it's down about $11 million or so from where we were a year ago. That's about 97, 98% of last year's level at this stage of the year. So still a tremendously high level of construction activity taking place in the community. That's certainly a positive aspect of what's happening in our economy. Looking at our cumulative, our 12-month rolling growth rate on sales taxes over the past 12 months, as the graphic indicates, we've seen growth of 3.5%. And that's down from a month ago. We were growing at about 4.1%, so we've seen that decline by about a half or a little more than a half a percentage point. Looking at entertainment tax revenue growth, they're still growing at a solid 5.1%. Over the past 12 months, you can see that growth rate has jumped around a little bit here recently, and most recently has slid down to that 5.1% growth rate. This month, I've added a slide to give you a perspective on another, I think, important aspect in the economy. That's the inflation rate. This reflects over the last 10 years the change in the consumer price index. This really impacts us in a couple of different ways, some good, some bad. In terms of our sales tax revenue growth, you can see over the last 3 years or so, we haven't exceeded 2% inflation, and that certainly suppresses prices for a lot of things that are subject to our sales tax, and so we don't get that natural boost in our sales tax revenues that we would if we were seeing higher rate of inflation. So that's kind of the negative aspect of it. On the positive side, certainly it's good for the city when, in terms of our expenditure budget, when we go to buy things or purchase things with tax dollars, we aren't seeing the price inflation that we might otherwise see. And certainly a big part of that benefiting the city's budget is reflected in that inflation rate, and that's the cost of fuel. We do spend a considerable amount of money each year on fuel, and when fuel prices are as low as they have been, we certainly benefit by that. Looking at our general fund, overall revenue and expenditure trends, revenues year to date, just over $79 million. That represents about 52% of what we've budgeted for revenues. Last year at this point we were at 55%. That reflects our sales tax revenues, partly anyway, reflected by our sales tax revenues that are not growing as quickly as we had anticipated. On the expenditure side, our expenses through July, at this point in the year, $81.2 million. That's 51% of our budget. Last year at this point, had expended 55% of our budget. So our expenses and revenues are both relative to budget running at a slower pace than what we did last year. So with that, as an overview, I'd open it up for any questions you folks have and see what's on your minds.
Councilor Urtenbach.
Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate the report, and I appreciate that you give it to us in such detail. I wanted to just talk, I have two kind of topics. One would be the end of your report, talking about sales tax growth not growing as fast as we expected it to. We've also heard rumblings that some items have been cut from the 2016 budget. Can you give us an idea what those are? The ones that we're kind of either not really cutting, but not spending in reaction to that. Do you have a list of those things? Are those things that we can kind of take a look at as we move through this process?
Yeah, there aren't really a lot of things within, looking at the general fund, and that's been, of course, the primary focus. I think most of them, if not all of them, I've shared those significant things. Some of the landscaping and remodeling at City Hall, some of the things that I mentioned that we've chosen not to move forward with at this time. There are some other things that we're tracking and capturing in terms of helping to offset that revenue gap. I've talked about the Cayley Branch library remodeling that did come in under budget. So rather than reprogram those dollars that we've saved in that project, we will essentially keep those and not reprogram those for other purposes and use those dollars to help fill in that gap. I mentioned a minute ago just the fuel budget. We're seeing those budgets underrun what has been budgeted, so we'll capture some fairly significant dollars in fuel savings as well. So we're piecing some of those bigger items together to fill in that gap, and then really the rest of it is just good management in terms of the day-to-day expenditures that the departments are managing through. And our goal continues to be, as it was at the start of the year, to finish 2016 with our general fund reserve level at very near that 25% level. So that's our expectation. I can't say with absolute certainty what the future holds, but that's certainly our expectation today and what we're managing towards.
Well, and in my experience, 6 years on the council, I wouldn't call them cheap. Maybe I would call them cheap, but they're very conservative in terms of the way that our directors run their budgets. That so often things just don't get spent, or they find a way to save somewhere. So I guess I hope that council will continue to be included on, what are the things that, if it really becomes dramatic, I don't know that it will be, but if it really becomes dramatic, that it be something that it's not a surprise to us that, maybe toward the end of the year something's going to be stopped or cut or whatever. My other question then would be, I want to look then specifically at that more detailed report that we get, the monthly financial status report that's available just for the public. It's also available on the website at siouxfalls.org. I'm just thinking at the bottom of page 5, the Event Center Construction Fund. It's just I'm not questioning it, but it's just an interesting thing. It seems like the event center is constructed. So can you talk to us about that available cash balance and where that might end up and what might be the reasoning for that to be there?
Be happy to. Yeah, there are a number of ongoing, very minor things that we're working through. You've heard us talk from the very beginning relative to the event center project about day 2 items. And most of those have been completed in terms of buying additional equipment for the facility, whether it's popcorn poppers or beer dispensers or radios, those types of things. We've really worked through a lot of those over the past year. We do have some building improvements and other facility improvements that we're going to be talking about. I'm on your schedule for, I believe it's the 6th of September. I'll bring Terry Torkelson with me and Chad Stoner, and we'll talk about some of the things that they've learned through the first full year of operation last year and some of the improvements that we're looking at to add to the efficiency of the facility and the effectiveness of how they operate. So I'd just ask you to be patient, and on the 6th of September we'll come back and walk you through some of those things and talk in more detail then, but that's the intention, is to utilize some of those dollars to continue to invest in the facility and improve on what we have.
Good. Thank you, Director Turbeck. Mr. Chair, I would have another question, but I'd defer to the other members. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I did not have a question until Councilor Urbanbach asked hers, and it sparked a few going forward. Councilor Urbanbach was asking about some of the items that were just delayed for now until we'll do them in the future sometime as needed. My question is, how big is that revenue gap? So, for example, I know she asked the items, but how much have we just paused on for now? Is it 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, or what was the target to try to save on to make sure that we remain at that 25%?
Well, the gap, if you want to call it that, in terms of our sales tax revenues running under what was anticipated, would amount to somewhere around $2 million.
Okay, and then what is the target for us to spend of reserves then, end of year, if we continue to grow? I mean, it's so hard to know. I mean, we're only in August, and so, we could have a huge spike, or we could continue to just kind of be stagnant for now. But with that said, what is the target to say we'd like to only use 2 million reserves to make sure we're at that 25%, or what's that magic dollar amount?
Yep. When the budget for 2016 was adopted, we were projecting to utilize about $3 million of our reserves. So that would have been almost a year ago now when that budget was adopted, and that continues to be our projection, to utilize about $3 million in reserves.
Okay, thank you.
And that, as I mentioned, that would have us finish the year right at that 25% level.
Right. Thank you, and thanks for having a watchful eye on it. I know that right away at the beginning of the year when things slowed a little sooner than we anticipated, I know that you and your department were on top of it and making sure that we kept a watchful eye on it, and so I appreciate that, or we could be in trouble, and so without your leadership that wouldn't have happened, so thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Staley.
And I was glad that Councilwoman Urbanbach brought up the issue up about the items that we're cutting back on. I would like to see that at some point. I think having that written down would be a beneficial thing. But on the other hand, I understand that that might be problematic because if, as she just said, if we get a lot, if things pick up, then those things could be reinstated, couldn't they? Moving, I mean, you hate to cut them out completely.
Right, I guess
Right? I mean,
up
it could
until
come
the end
back
of the
in
year,
again.
the budget is still open, but yeah, and
Right.
it's important to understand that there isn't some master list of things that are getting eliminated from the budget. There are some of those larger items that I've just mentioned where we are capturing some savings or delaying, in the case of the city hall improvements and the landscaping there, those are significant initiatives that we've chosen not to move forward with. Really, everything else is a matter of just more effectively, everyday scrutinizing expenditures and looking at each and every contract that we enter into. Is it something that we absolutely need to do, or is it okay if we wait on that? So you won't find a lot of significant items in that. It's really, and if you look at on a percentage basis, maybe that will make it a little more, bring it into perspective a little more, I suppose, that we're, in terms of percentages of the overall budget, we're talking about 1 or 2%. So it's not as if it's going to be a significant impact to any department. So we just need to capture a little bit all across the board as we go through the next 5 months to the end of the year, and our gap will be right where we need it to be.
Would you ever go to departments instead of taking money out of the reserves and say to them, we need to reduce our spending by 2%? And I know back when we had that economic downturn, people were within the state, and I mean, they were being told, cut back, we've got to make do with less. Would that ever, when would we ever see that happening?
Counselor, that's exactly what we're doing this year. When we adopted the budget, we anticipated 6% growth in sales tax, and with that, utilizing $3 million of reserves. So with the slowdown in sales tax dollars, we still anticipate using only $3 million in reserves, just as we had intended to do. So that offset from slower revenue growth is going to be made up with spending reductions. So that's exactly what we're doing.
But what if we didn't what if we said we're not going to even dip into the reserves at all? I mean, would we ever say, no, we don't need to even worry about reserves, we're going to just do this by cutting back?
Understand that the reason we had anticipated using reserves this year were for some of those large one-time initiatives, and I keep going back to the Cayley Branch Library project. That was a significant one-time expenditure from the general fund that doesn't have to be repeated or recurring each year, so that will come out of the budget. It's funded with reserve dollars, and that was an appropriate use to get us to that 25% level. It's managing our the amount of reserves that we have above 25%. It's very, very appropriate to tackle those kinds of one-time projects with those dollars. So that's the way we've been proceeding, and that's carrying out the budget that the council adopted.
Thank you.
Councilor Neisert.
I have 3 questions, and they're kind of basics, just for myself and maybe others who are just beginning this journey. So the first thing is in your financial overview, where it breaks down the sales tax. There's retail sales, services, and transportation. Now, retail sales seems pretty obvious, but could you just give an example of what would be services and then something that would be transportation?
Sure. And keep in mind, these are categories that the state of South Dakota, the Department of Revenue, utilizes. So these aren't our own city categories. Services, if you hire an attorney or an accountant to do work for you as a professional service, those are in South Dakota taxable transactions. So those types of things are a couple of examples for services. And transportation, I don't think it's hard to imagine what that might be if you pay to ship something within city. I'm not certain, but I expect taxi services are probably subject or would fall into that category. Anything where you're paying to transport goods from one location to another.
Okay, thank you. And then And just so to be clear, and not to pick on any particular budget item, but anything that you've held back that you had budgeted for this year, as of December 31st, the authorization for that would go away? I mean, let's just take the city hall improvements. If you don't complete it by the end of the year, does that authority then go away and then you have to come back and put it in a new budget or get a new appropriation?
That's correct.
And a supplemental, for example, next year?
That's correct.
Okay.
In the case of capital projects, that appropriation stays in place, but in the case of the city hall remodeling, that was a general fund operating budget expense, so those lapse at the end of the year.
You said the capital that stays in place, is it like 3 years or some amount of years?
Yeah, if it's under or unutilized for 3 years, then I think by default it lapses.
Okay.
That's
And
per charter.
And then finally, something I was sort of thinking about, let's say that entertainment tax continued to grow and you had extra money in the entertainment tax fund. Could you, and I'm not asking whether you would want to or not, but would we have the authority to take a couple $1 million from that and use that to pay for part of the event center bond that's in the second penny? Because I know we've backed it with the second penny, but is the entertainment tax dollars, would that be an allowable use of that?
I think that would be an allowable use, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Erpenbach, you had other questions.
I did. I had one more, and I apologize ahead of time, Director Turback, because it's something I ask often, but I again got an email today talking about the dramatic drowning in debt that the city of Sioux Falls is doing, and so I would just like to do that remedial course again, just very briefly. It is, again, on that monthly financial status report. It's page 17. And I was looking at it because I was thinking, you know, if my family is drowning in debt, it's probably that we're, 18% interest on credit card loans. I bought too many shoes last month, that kind of thing. But I look at the outstanding interest rates on these, and I see 2%, 3%, 1.25%. Can you talk about why we have the amount of debt we have, and what's our plan for paying this off?
Mm-hmm. Well, the general approach that the city has taken over the years, to your the last element of your question in terms of how quickly we pay it off, the approach has been to keep the terms as short as possible. And you see within the water and water reclamation funds, which combined, amount to about $145 million of a total of $325 million of debt, are generally very, relatively short term. They're investing in very long-term assets, things that, water and sewer infrastructure that will have a life of 40, 50 years or longer, and many of those are structured at 10-year maturities, so they're paid off relatively rapidly in relation to the length of the life of the asset that they're intended to finance. So we do that to maintain a fairly high degree of flexibility in terms of understanding that we're a growing community, and we know we're going to have to continue to reinvest in our water system, in our sewer system, in our infrastructure, and so that by paying it off more quickly, we are able to maintain that flexibility and recapture that capacity to borrow additional dollars so we can continue to grow. The bulk of the water and the wastewater debt is through the state's revolving loan fund program. Those interest rates are in effect subsidized by the federal government to promote and encourage communities, incentivize communities to invest in those types of infrastructure systems. And so we get a very, very good interest rate on those loans. And from a purely financial standpoint, we'd be foolish not to take advantage of those programs, in spite of the fact that it may be distasteful sometimes for people just from a philosophical standpoint to borrow money. But it's really, from a financial perspective, it's a real winner for the city. The other bonds or debt that we have outstanding are primarily, and there's a few exceptions, but primarily second penny sales tax revenues, or debt that's backed with second penny sales tax. And by comparison, every comparison that we make, whether you look at it on a per capita basis or on a percentage of budget basis, the city of Sioux Falls is not drowning in debt. We're paying off our bonds and our debt very, very quickly. We pay off typically about $25 million of principal per year, so you can see that at $325 million outstanding, that is reduced very, very quickly. It's significantly lower than it was just a few years ago. So I don't know if I've touched on every one of your points in your question, Counselor. If I've missed something, please tell me.
Yeah, I just really wanted, again, I do have one more question, but I just wanted to remind the public that this is the monthly financial status report, and it is available. It's a public document. It's done monthly, and it's on siouxfalls.org. So I'm looking at, again, page 17, and I'm looking at, it looks like, and I'm, as you all know, terrible at numbers, but I think more than 50% of the loans that we have are for things like storm drainage, so that our streets don't flood as bad, water, which, I don't know, I guess we use that once in a while, and water reclamation, more than 50% of the loans that we have. And so my question is, and again, they are 1.25% interest rate up to, there's one, an older one that is between 3.5 and 5%. I suppose that depends on the year and the way things go. My question is, how are we paying that off? You said they're backed by the sales tax, but is that how we're paying for it? That when I literally go buy that pair of shoes, my 6 pennies on the dollar go and help pay for water? Or how does the water and water rec work? How do we pay for that?
In the case of the water debt and the water reclamation or sanitary sewer debt, those are all repaid with user fees. So if you're using water from our system and you get a water bill, part of that bill is being utilized to repay those loans.
So if I don't use water, I'm not helping pay off the loan then?
Right. The more you use, the more you're helping. So drink up.
And you're right. And the leak in my sprinkler system that my husband discovered last month, yeah, we had a good bill. Thank you. I appreciate the remedial version of it. Thank you, Tracy.
Councilor Erickson, did you say you had another question? Okay, I thought you had raised your hand. Councilor Neisert again.
The only thing I guess I'd like to clarify is, and I think I've asked this before, and maybe it's online or maybe it could be a footnote. A lot of these are very obvious what the debts are for, but just for my knowledge, when people ask me, library and parks 1 and 2, would you remember offhand what those were for?
I probably can't quote you all the details of it. The very first two on that list are oftentimes referred to as quality of life bonds. The first one is Quality Life 1. The second one is Quality Life 2. Prairie West Library was one of the library projects. I believe the downtown, and I don't know which one came from which of those two bond issues. The downtown library remodeling or renovation. The parks one that financed part of the River Greenway project. Some of the Sanford Sports Complex, the junior football fields. I'm running out of details, I guess.
So it's a litany of different park and library uses, literally.
Yeah, those go back, were originally issued in 2007 and 2009, so kind of packaged a number of projects together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. I thank you again for putting together a good report, and we'll look forward to having you back next month so we can ask some more questions that we non-accountants need to have answered.
Well, I don't plan to go anywhere, so
okay.
See you next month.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. With that in mind, that draws us to an end of our informational meeting. Appreciate your time, everybody. Meeting is adjourned.